So when we're looking at global partnerships and collaborations to date, what do you think is working and what do you think there's still left to do? And you can't answer the question by saying there's a lot left to do. So can I call on Paul and Ivan to answer that question to get started?
I mean, I think there's a lot that's working, and certainly from our perspective at Medicines for Malaria Venture, something that works well is flexibility in terms of the way that partnerships work. So we may have project teams where there is sustained collaboration, where people are coming in and being part of the team over many years, and we may have other instances where perhaps a pharma company or someone will just come in for a limited period where they have something specific that they can contribute. So that flexibility of being able to tailor both the people's contributions both to the needs of the project and people's availability, I think is really helpful. I think in terms of what's left to do, I think we do well at, say, collaborating within malaria, and we're starting to reach out and collaborate into other diseases. But I'm sure there's more that we could do if we worked as a wider network in terms of across the whole neglected disease space, in terms of being able to share partnerships and collaborations that we could perhaps leverage more from our limited resource by perhaps collaborating more.
Evan, would you like to comment?
Yes, so at DNDi also I can say the partnership are working fairly well. Our philosophy is to empower the partners we're working with, so they really take ownership of the project, and so they motivated to work on it. Perhaps what is more difficult for us is we can't bring a drug to the market on our own, and we need industrial partnership. So that's more difficult to have as a partner, to build as a partnership, because it involves many other aspects than just the project. So we need to agree on what it means on financial terms. It means that an industrial partners commit to manufacture a drug, and it comes to all the questions we discussed during the day: for how many times, for how many years, for how many doses, for what market, etc., etc. So that trigger more discussion.
Great, thanks. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on it from a funder's perspective. Before I joined EDCTP, I was working at Gates Foundation as well. And one part of our job is actually to facilitate these partnerships between academia, pharma industry, and also funders, and try to figure out what is actually our common goal and how do we make things happen. Of course, the difficulties on that side are now being more on the in an organization where we fund grants from tax money, basically. It's the different timelines. Of course, pharma, it's like, oh, we want to have things done basically yesterday. But from our funders' perspective, it takes quite a long time to actually make these grants. So that's a big, difficult issue.
Yeah, if I could add perhaps 3 points. I think one, partnerships aren't just about bringing people around the same table. You have to actually invest in the partnership itself, so that the sum of the parts becomes greater than the individual parts itself, and that does require investment, but it pays off in the long term. And I think part of making the partnership more efficient is around creating a common language. I think some other speakers talked about common vision, common goals. Certainly from the GAVI perspective, in terms of our partnership with industry and other partners in immunization, we have found that very important to be able to speak a common language around, what do we mean by, how do we define success? What is the right product? How do we see this playing out in the field? Because when you actually unpack those things, it often turns out that people have quite different views on that. And finally, I think having that end-to-end view, already thinking about down the line implementation, what are the constraints, What are the opportunities for synergies? Perhaps sometimes that means partnering with across sectors, even thinking beyond vaccines and health. But for example, for rabies vaccine implementation, you have to think about partnering with the veterinary sector. For HPV vaccine delivery, you have to think about partnering with the education sector. So really pushing the thinking on that end-to-end view.
Yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've observed with the DWORM3 project, if we look at our major stakeholders being maybe NGOs responsible for distribution, government, researchers, companies or funders, I think there's an inherent issue of short-termism. So whether that's based on an electoral process over 5 years or a funding stream or whatever's topical with the funders at a particular time. And I sometimes feel that this doesn't give us, as a collective, the opportunity to move very far into the future and perhaps achieve those large-scale impacts at the national level that we want to achieve. So to try and address this, what we've actually done is interviewed thought leaders across those different groups and tried to identify exactly what you've mentioned about common languages and common visions. And in order for us to react with our communications output to ensure research uptake, we're trying to develop a more collective strategy. And I think by attempting to tackle the issues in front of us with a holistic approach where we engage all of our different audiences at any one time, it can really help with sustainable impact and activities.
Great, thank you. So how can we, as partners, I'm modifying the questions that you guys may have heard of, how can we, as partners, try to develop new opportunities, especially to get better outcomes in some of our partnerships, and try to navigate better quality partnerships itself? So, for example, in terms of usage of data, getting involved to try to bring industry participation earlier into the game, making sure that our implementation programs are better utilized and reached. Andrew, could you make the first comment on how you think, from your vision, some of these opportunities can be reaped and used in partnership development?
Yeah, I'm sort of kind of coming at this from the, I guess our experience is deploying technology solutions to help at the implementation stage. That's really where we've got most of our, spent most of our time. And in my experience is getting people to talk to each other and keeping things as simple as possible. If you focus on what's important, keep asking yourselves the question, why do we need to capture that information? Why do we need to distribute this information? And whittle everything down to the simplest possible case, and keep things really simple, basically. Be aware of the landscape that you're operating in. Make the technology that you're using or the data that you're capturing relevant to the place where you're working.
And how does a company or a funder or a product development partnership develop those new opportunities and skills? What kind of some of the things that you look for, and how can you do your work better? Maybe you need inspiration from the audience in this.
I can start. I think what is always helpful is to have some sort of strategy, because of course we all work in global health diseases, but we are all doing a slightly different area of focus, and having a good, clear, defined vision and strategy where you want to end up helps facilitate talking with partners, because then you can figure out what do we have in common, and also it's helpful for funders then obviously figuring out where are the gaps and where should we step in and help investing.
Yes, I fully agree that it's important in a partnership to have a clear common goal, but I think you even have to go further than that. Because sometimes, because you have very different background, you come from very different worlds, you don't fully understand each other, even if you use the same words. So I think beyond the common goal, you have to really invest and spend time in understanding your partners, understanding where they come from, and understanding what are their, I would say, secondary goals or additional goals. on which basis are they judged by the institution they belong to? I can give you a concrete example. Let's imagine the company I work for is in a partnership with an academia for the development of a vaccine. Even if we have a common goal, what will be important from my company perspective will be to have something very simple, to the point, to get to the regulatory approval as soon as possible. From my academic partner, they are judged on the research they do, on the publication they do. So in the same clinical trial, they will be willing to have plenty of other objectives, to do more in-depth research, plenty of exploratory research. And if you only define the common goal, but don't spend a little time understanding the additional goals or secondary goals each partner can have, you will have misunderstandings. So I think you have to go further, and it's a real skill and real investment working in partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, just to back up those comments, I think that's very relevant from a technology point of view as well, because we can have that the common goal, but if you haven't factored in the other, the indicators people need or the way they need to report back to their other partners or their other donors, then you can get all sorts of disputes going on. Barry's law, I think, Christian was talking about.
I think it's a very dynamic situation as well, and you constantly need to be looking for new partners. So if I think back 5 years ago, some of our most valued pharma partners are not now active in neglected disease research. So the situation changes, and you've got to be ready and respond and looking. So examples that there's been a lot of money gone in at the moment to stimulate Japanese pharma companies to get involved through the GHIT. So that's been a very rich new source of collaboration with us with Japanese pharma. Each year we actually we have a call for proposals where we ask people to submit ideas for new projects, and that idea of reaching out to the community and bringing new ideas forwards. And even if they're not fully formed, they may not have all the elements of the team, but we can help enhance, and if they're missing drug metabolism or chemistry, we can build that in. So I think actively looking for new partners is very important, as well as maintaining the existing relationships you have.
I think quite often institutions end up in a situation where partnerships are formed between individuals of different institutions. And those individuals are often subject to change, and sometimes that can really dissolve a partnership, or what was originally there can no longer exist. I think that in the UK, this has only become, I suppose, in vogue quite recently, is the idea of having a partnership manager. You don't necessarily need to go to that extent, but I think ensuring that there is an individual who's taking a structured approach to managing those partnerships across all different stakeholders or groups you may be in dialogue with is very important. And there's certainly, if that person disappears, you can't have a situation where the partnerships disappear. So this is something definitely worth investing in.
Would anyone from the audience like to comment on this point? Yes, please, Christian.
Thank you very much.
Please wait for the mic.
Christian Boris, we start from NTD. So I was really happy to hear all what was said, and I think Valerie is, from my experience, really hitting the nail on the head. And we would call that expectation management, because that we are working as a troop of 20 people with an organization that has like 100,000 people. It's not always very easy. And I know that you guys have very strict processes, and we sometimes end up in the situation where the big pharma company says we have processes, and that's the end of the road. And then we say yes, but your processes are directly running into the wall under the situation we are working, and then sometimes the response comes back. We still have processes, and then this actually can be ruled out. You said expectations and objectives. The experience is, and that's what we're not trying to do, is to discuss these things really at the beginning of a project. Because sometimes you find out we just simply don't fit, and we shouldn't work together. It's like in a relationship. And but I'm very, very happy that you also, from big pharma, you see that, that sometimes it's really adjust to all the rules. You said contracting, working for Big Pharma 10 years ago, we had 5 or 7 pages of contracts. So you negotiated for 3 days, and then you set out to work. The last contract we had with Big Pharma was a negotiation of 3 months, and they were criticized by our guys so slow. But the 3 months was not us, the 3 months was Big Pharma. So I see this need of really clearing and clarifying expectations at the very beginning of the project.
I think that reflects also a little bit of the experience I had when, as a young 30-something-year-old, I had to once negotiate a contract with 19 pharmaceutical companies and 7 universities. It took 6 months. But you're kind of proud of that. So, but at the end of it, no, 6 months was not bad at the end of it. And that partnership is still running today under somebody else's hands. But
basically, I'd like to come back to this issue. Someone actually raised the point about collaboration between the different programs, the different partnerships. I just want to share some experience. A couple of months ago, I contributed to a meeting led by WHO in London. They want to create a modeling network for epidemics and pandemics, and we brought together a number of stakeholders, data providers. They brought a big number of modelers and some other stakeholders. And we tried, and we had also a bunch of disease program leads from WHO, and you can think of many different, Zika, chikungunya, and many other diseases that are prone to epidemics and pandemics. And we spent 2 days trying to identify cross-cutting issues that could actually lead to some collaboration between all these silo disease vertical programs. And we identified many of the issues that you've been discussing during the last during the day, in terms of how do we collaborate in order to address many methodological challenges that are related to modeling. You also identified about implementation research. This is something that we also identify as a common challenge for many of the different diseases. What are the logistics in terms of what is required for the rapid deployment of doctors or many drugs and many other things? That surely there are some specifics related to the diseases. They are very, very common, a lot of commonalities between the different diseases. And you also mentioned another thing that we identified as an opportunity to work together between different diseases, and that is modeling behaviors and approaching the community in a common way. Regardless of what disease we're looking at, the communities tend to react in a similar way. Ways that are probably can be modeled more jointly in a joint manner by a coordinated group. That's what I would say. Thank you.
great, thanks. Anyone want to make a comment to that, or it's okay? Okay, so as I said, we've got quite a few veterans here, product development and in partnerships. So I have a question for the panelists and for the audience. I'll start with the panelists. What are some of the unusual ways that you have seen partnerships are working, and some of the stuff that's actually changing the way we look at product development and partnerships in the last few years? In your thing, maybe reflect a little bit about what you've seen, which surprised you about those kind of relationships and partnerships that we've seen. Give you a minute to think about it, and then I'll call on somebody.
I guess an example of a very unusual project, whereas projects usually happen to an extent behind closed doors, but we're experimenting at the drug discovery phase with a completely open project where everything in the project is open. So all results, all discussions and decisions are on the web. Anyone can come in and contribute. This idea that, if you see a problem, someone's probably seen it before, the solution's out there, so can you tap into the community? And it's a work in progress, but I think it's an interesting example of actually trying to do drug discovery in a different way and see if we can explore alternative models.
I think we've also seen some different new players getting involved, like logistics firms and other firms getting involved in product development, which I think is quite unusual. Anyone else? Okay, so let's move on to money, the big elephant in the room. How do we ensure that our partnerships are going to be sustainable, especially when we're looking at a climate of lots of different changes, competing health priorities? How do we make sure that our partnerships actually remain partnerships instead of competing with each other for the same pots that are available as money runs drier every year? Any thoughts on this? Any reflections? Let's start with perhaps Magda. Maybe you could get started.
Well, I guess keeping the community communication open and trying to constantly figure out what is the common goal. I think one issue that I wanted to raise that has been mentioned this morning, this long-term funding, because I agree, and I'm also concerned that most funders, including government funding and private foundations, they all focus on 3 to 5 years, maybe, if you're lucky, 10 years, but I think that's more the exception. So I personally don't even know if you start, I don't know, even data management or all these platforms, I don't know how they are sustainable beyond this grant. So, and I don't know if that has been tackled even by the governments or the European Commission. So, but to sustain and the partnerships where now funding, where the different partners compete for the same funds, yeah, to me it's really, it comes down to dialogue and see what everybody brings to the table.
Does priority setting help? Judith, you've been involved in trying to set some priorities for GAVI's board, and of course I can imagine it's a difficult task, and all of us have to make priorities in this competing landscape. Maybe a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, yes, certainly priority setting helps. I think I was trying to reflect on the questions because GAVI is quite a different animal in a way. I think perhaps linking it back to your previous question, what is quite unique about GAVI is that, we are in a partnership with the manufacturers, with industry, but in a way that goes beyond just a contractual relationship. And a lot of that is also about, it's helped by transparency, which I think generally is really important in partnerships, because that starts to build trust, and trust is perhaps the most important thing in partnerships, right? But I think in terms of the GAVI partnership, the way that the manufacturers are, of course, the ones selling us the vaccines. So, some people have said, well, they're conflicted. How could they be on your board? But they are on our board, and they are, of course, sometimes they have to withdraw from decision making. But they are on the board because they have to be part of the conversation. So it's that transparency and data sharing and shared decision making, involving them and all the other partners in the policy setting that I think really starts to build something that holds and that is sustainable, especially when, as you say, you have a confirmed strategic approach to priority setting that is data driven and that is transparent, that everyone buys into.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite subjects is the financing side of life, because as a organisation that gets involved in implementations, typically we're a subcontractor to the main implementing partners. We'll work for a large international NGO. They'll have a pot of money from a donor that'll be designated to do a particular job over a particular period of time, 3, 4, 5 years, you say is fairly typical. And then that funding stops, and pretty much everything stops, including our technology, because we try and make ourselves as affordable as we can, but we still need to be paid. And then you get into the question of what you people talk about sustainability. One of the first questions I ever heard when I got involved in this business was I was sitting in a meeting at the World Bank with about 100 other people, and someone said, can someone just define what we mean by sustainability? Because, and even now I've never heard a real proper good answer to it, quite frankly. Sustainability, to some people, sustainability means who's going to pay, whereas other people might say, well, sustainable means it's got to be useful, it's got to be serving a purpose, and if it serves a purpose, then someone will pay. But again, that doesn't necessarily follow, because someone's got to put their hand in the pocket at the end of the day. Anyway, I could talk all evening about this, because it's very frustrating to put a lot of effort into deploying systems. We try and do the best job we can, get the best understanding what the requirements are, put the best system in when we can, and then at the end of the 2, 3, 4, 5 years, just as everyone's really getting some value out of it, funding stops. and the project itself stops, which is very frustrating.
Yeah. Ian, would you like to offer a comment?
Yeah, sure. If you look at the moment at UK aid, DFID, for instance, they have this kind of contradictory position on funding, where it's meant to be joint, but it's meant to be competitive. So one minute we're all together bidding for a piece of money, the next minute we're all against one another because we've been competitive. And I think that we really need to work to look at productive partnerships as being a distinct output of a project. So it's not just a case of research findings or drug delivery or whatever it might be, but actually advocating to those decision makers like Priti Patel that these productive and efficient partnerships are working very well in the betterment to the spending of their money, and try and help them in an upstream management position to better understand how they're going to get value for money. Because at the moment they're creating a separation between partners. And I wonder how productive this is, and I think it needs to be addressed.
So we had that discussion in our organization quite a few months ago to see how can we actually help to maximize the partnerships and more engagement. Our business is in the business of ensuring that the pharma industry partners more with appropriate partners and makes more impact in those partnerships, but there's nothing we can measure if the partnerships are not supported and those partnerships are not supported. So we need money to be distributed across a whole series of organizations such as these in order for us to show any result from the pharma industry's response. So, and I think that's one of the things that one has to think of. How can we maximize each other's work and maximize the results that we actually see with every dollar that's being put into either one of us itself? Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? Please wait for the mic until it comes.
I guess not so much a question as a comment, but it might lead to further comments. But I was at a meeting, I think, in the beginning of February in Brussels about EU funding of poverty-related diseases. I think it covered the period from around about 2000 up to the end of FP7. And they looked at all the projects that had been funded and their impact. And one of the statistics that came out was that they calculated they'd spent, I think, about 85% of those funds over that period. I can't remember how many billion that was, but it was a lot of money on the big three and not on NTDs, which I thought was a very sobering statistic. And as far as I can see from the way that Horizon 2020 has run so far, that probably hasn't got any better for NTDs, and maybe even got worse in 2020. And I think, you pointed out, it's 5 years since the London Declaration. One of the issues, I think, is the emphasis on donated drugs. Whilst I think the donated drugs have been a great thing, often a lot of the big pronouncements are around scaling up further drug donation and putting across the idea that if we achieve certain levels of drug donation or distribution and adherence, then therefore most of the NTDs will be solved. I'm not convinced, as has been explained by other people today, that that's the case for most of the NTDs. And what worries me is that things like the London Declaration, whilst in one sense are very good in attracting attention to NTDs, and in another sense detract from innovative research for NTDs, because they put out an idea that there's a solution there already that's very cheap, very easy, and it's a case of getting the drug out there and then the problem goes away. What I'm concerned about is that message getting across to funders, and funders thinking, well, actually that NTD is really solved, or it's a case of let's get more drug X out there from company Y who's supplying it. I don't know how I think about that scenario for NTDs. I think maybe all of the NTDs have got drug donation. I think it's a big factor in there.
Would anyone like to comment?
Yeah, actually, the European Commission, they had a call for, it was vaccines. Unfortunately, it was lumped together with malaria, so it was malaria and NTDs. And of course, NTDs can't compete with the big three because they have they have more or less defined TPPs and they know where they are, and the NIDs are more upstream, I would say. So I'm not sure if the Commission will have separate NTD calls soon. Obviously, they rely on EDCTP to fund the phase 2 through 4 trials. That's why in our second program we have now NTDs listed. My impression is, and I'm very new to the NTD field, since it covers this variety of different diseases, they are all in different stages. So I'm not quite sure, and actually most of the diseases don't even have a proper, a TPP where you know where do we invest and what products do we need. And you cover a variety of viruses, worms, all sorts of different things. So it's a little bit difficult to, if you put out a call, I mean, it's quite broad. If I remember correctly, the Gates Foundation, at least if you look at the feeds from Bill Gates himself, they highlight NTDs as one of the major things. So I don't know if they do more directed funding because they have the flexibility. So that's at least from the funders' perspective.
Yeah, I'll just respond to that point. I think it's not to say there's no funding for innovation NTDs. When Gates is there, Gates tends to take things, my perception anyway, is that they take things at a relatively late stage that already have a lot of promise and perhaps not at earlier stages. But going back to the call from 2020 last year for vaccines, I mean, that was a particularly frustrating case that underlines, I think, what I'm trying to say, which was, it went out with being open to malaria, as you say, and NTDs. And I think, I don't know for sure on the grapevine, I mean, certainly we weren't funded on oxycodone. I don't think any NTD was actually funded from that call. So the malaria was funded, and I think Zika.
Some viruses, yeah.
Doubly frustrating because Zika had its own special emergency call. So in effect, sort of two Zika sort of had double dipping, if you like, quite close together in 2020.
Reflecting on this and perhaps responding to your earlier question, Jay, on prioritization, a question to the other panelists or the audience, is the list too long? Is the list of NTDs too long? Would there be value in some global institution coming up with a ranking or coming up with a top 5? Would that focus efforts?
Christian?
I don't think it would lead anywhere, because the diseases are here. You can't just make diseases disappear if you just list or don't list them, because with this you just exclude certain people. But it depends on what you actually want to achieve. And the big problem at the moment we have is that about 9 diseases, to the best of my knowledge, are set on the agenda for elimination. And elimination is a completely different ballgame of control in terms of measures, in terms of investments. And there, the funders and the Gates Foundation is playing a relatively special role in that game, I have to say. The funders have to accept that the last patients actually cost each one a lot of money. So maybe yes, if you want to split the list, you should not say we have too many diseases on the neglected diseases list, because I think this list will rather go longer. But maybe we have to treat especially the cases where we actually go in for elimination, because they're a completely different funding mechanism and a completely different thinking, as you said it.
Maybe I can comment on that. So what I think is would be helpful is to have clear strategies for each of the diseases, because you obviously need a different approach for viruses than worms, than bacteria, and they're all at different stages in, as Christian said, some of them are on a path of eradication. Some actually you have drugs that work. It seems to be more an implementation thing, or you may need an additional diagnostics or something, so the last step is missing. So it's very difficult, to figure out where are they. So that would be, before I would do a ranking system, I would first start looking at what is actually the path, what path are we on and how do we get there. And when you look at the WHO webpage, for some they do have some sort of approaches, for some they don't even have the prevalence data. So it's very difficult to see where are these diseases and where should we step in.
Great. So with interest in time, I'll take one more question, either from the audience or from the panel. or a comment on the last discussion? Otherwise, I will wrap up.
I just want to actually endorse that opinion about. I just want to endorse that opinion. I've done a lot of prioritization. I like that idea of separating diseases depending on what stage of the epidemic you are, rather than just thinking of a unified set of criteria that you can apply to all those diseases. It makes sense to probably run two prioritization exercises separately. We have done that exercise for endemic and emerging diseases in Latin America, and we conducted this prioritization separately, recognizing that actually the criteria were completely different. And this might be also something that we need to contemplate and bring the case to the WHO.
Okay, so what we've heard today, and if you do have a question, just scream it out. What we've heard today is a lot on whether prioritization helps, knowing which path we're in on specific product development or specific diseases, and trying to make sure that our interventions fit into that. Paul spoke about flexibility, the unknown definition of sustainability that Andrew spoke about. I think Valerie articulated very nicely the need for a common language, common goals, and managing the expectations of various partnerships. And various people in the audience spoke about, how can we make sure that we're not competing with our priorities itself in financing and funding. And I think the short-termism that Iain spoke about is really quite critical in the implementation that Judith speaks about. How do we make sure that we have this long-term vision on our work and try to apply it into some of our decision-making and try to empower the people in our partnerships to make a larger impact. So if there's no other last points from either the audience or the panel, then I think a quick round of applause for the panelists.